Welcome to this Broadcom video on the integration of AI and ESP. In this video, we install the connector. The purpose of AAI integrations is to acquire two types of data from the scheduler, events and definitions. In this video, we install the connector. This is a Broadcom technology called the connector framework, which supports several schedulers. We'll go through the various elements, install and config files, and the log. We'll perform the installation on Windows and then provide the commands for Linux. The procedures are identical. Finally, we'll create a scheduler connection in AAI's web UI to complete the setup. We have three systems: the AAI server host, the system where the ESP message service hub is accessed, and a third system for the connector. Once installed, a batch file executes. This prompts us to configure the connection to the AAI system. The values are stored in a config file called application.yaml. On Windows, it runs automatically. On Linux, we have to run it manually. The connector is started either as a Linux process or Windows service. We'll check the log to establish that the connector framework is talking to the AAI server. Then, in the AAI web UI, we set up the connection to ESP. Once we've established that the connector is working, we configure the connection in the AAI web UI. The connector communicates with the message service hub to submit data requests and handle deliveries in return. To make sure AAI is running, we install the connector as root or administrator. We download the latest version of the package from the Broadcom download site. The package is a zip file. We unzip it. Then we execute the install executable. When installed, the connector can be controlled with either a Windows service or systemd, systemctl commands on Linux. When the installation is finished, a configuration script executes automatically on Windows, and we have to run it manually on Linux. This prompts us for a number of values like the AAI URI. These values are needed for the connector to connect to AAI. They are populated in a file called application.yaml, which is the main configuration file. The system can be started either with the Windows service or systemctl. Start. We check the log to make sure the connector is talking to AAI. If there is no log, something went wrong, and you'll need to run the config script manually to fix the values. Finally, we add the scheduler in the AAI web UI. With this information, the connector is able to connect to the messaging host, communicate with the message service hub, and acquire events and definitions. We run the installation as administrator. This is our zip file. It should be labeled for the appropriate scheduler. We unzip. We have the exe for Windows. We run this as administrator. Specify the location of the installation and accept the shortcut prompts. Note that in situations where an unsupported version of Java is currently referenced in your Java home variable, the installer will prompt you for the location of the correct version. The connector was installed. The setup config script starts. We're in the config script. We press enter to continue. Note the message. You'll recognize this when we show the actual script at the end. The first prompt is the AAI server URI. Ignore the default. Instead, type the host name of the AAI host and the HTTP port, which is 8080. Next, enter the connector name. These names are important. When you create the scheduler connection, you'll have to select it in a drop-down list in the AAI Web UI. This is how the connector is known by AAI. Enter the host name of the connector. This name has no real incidence on the overall setup, since the connector does not rely on this information for network connections. But it is added to the AAI database, and so we enter the proper host name. The next prompt is the key password for situations where you're securing the connector with TLS SSL. We are not, and so we can ignore this. TLS will be covered in another video. The next prompt is the AAI username. This is the user and password that we use when logging into the AAI Web UI. When setting up for testing, you can use the defaults. However, when deploying in production, if you maintain different schedulers, it's important to create a dedicated user account for each scheduler connection. Using a single user account could block all scheduling connections if, for any reason, a lock happens on that account. The domain is JAWS. Enter the location of the log. The default is logs in the main file system, which is fine. Provide sizing and rotation values. You can always adjust these later on, based on data volumes processed by the connector. The default value rotates the log at 10 megabytes. Enter the log max count. The default keeps a maximum of 5 logs. Let's check the log. The log tells you that the connector is communicating with AAI and received 0 scheduler. This is entirely consistent with the current situation. The connector was configured to communicate with AAI. We check the application.yaml file. You recognize the values we entered: AI server, username, password, domain, and so forth. You'll be able to see the service in Windows Services. We can now set up the scheduler connection in the AAI Web UI. We name the connection and it's your choice. Then we select the appropriate scheduler. Let's look at the form. We use the connector drop-down menu to select the ESP connector we installed. This should match the name we gave it. Then we have to provide the messaging service hub host using IP, DNS, and so forth, as well as the port. If you're using a secure message service hub connection, messaging requires a user and password, which should have been configured in ESP. In all likelihood, you'll be using the non-secured TCP option, and these fields will be optional. You should also have a token, which guarantees data stream integrity throughout the entire system: adapter, message service, connector, and AAI. Requests for definition data will be sent by default once a day at noon, but you can use this drop-down menu to add more requests. Say if you wanted to execute twice a day. You can also set the period in days, which determines how far in the future the connector will poll for possible executions. The default is 7 days, which should be fine if this is a test install. Finally, you set the event data polling cycle. Set to 30 seconds, which is short enough for ESP and AAI to be in sync. Assuming your configuration is correct, AAI will be acquiring data from the scheduler after a moment. The status will say on time, which means everything is working well, or behind, which means there is substantial volume of data to import and AAI needs more time. If after a few minutes the status is locked on behind, then check the log, you might have a configuration issue. You might also want to restart the connector if you're confident your configuration is accurate. This will resolve the issue of the status not changing. As a rule, this connector checks the scheduler definition on a 5-minute cycle. So you may need to wait up to 5 minutes for an update to be reflected in the environment. We'll show the log in the event you've run into an issue. We'll also show the configuration script, which you may need to run manually if your initial configuration failed. We do not recommend updating application.yaml manually. It's better to rerun the script. The log shows the information that pertains to the current acquisition process, the number of objects, definitions, agents, and so forth. This is the configuration script. You will recognize the initial message we saw in the DOS prompt. This is the Linux installation procedure. The commands should be consistent with what we just described. We have downloaded the complete AAI installer zip file in a user's downloads folder. There is a directory called connectors. Look for the appropriate connector technology in that directory, say Atomic or Control-M. Extract it, that is the connector install zip. Unzip the file. Gunzip the tar.gz package. Untar the package. Install the connector as root. The script is called connector-install.sh. Use the install option at the end. If you're uninstalling or upgrading, use the uninstall or upgrade options and follow the instructions. The connector is installed in /opt/ the name of the scheduler solution, -connector. A user called the same is created as well. The file system belongs to this user. Position yourself in the connector directory. Execute the configuration script. Make sure you do so as the owner of the file system and not root. The script contains the same prompts we saw earlier. If Java is accurately set in the user path, then the script simply completes and you can skip the next step. If not, you are prompted for the full path of the Java command. Only then can the script execute and complete. At the end, you are instructed to execute the service configuration script. This is the next step, which you should only execute if you were prompted for Java. As stated earlier, the connector service is controlled with systemd. We need to update the version of the service in systemd before executing control-ctl commands. We run the configure-service.sh script to do so. This will copy the associated service elements to /etc/systemd. We can now start the connector with systemctl. As we did earlier, we can inspect the log. We can also look at application.yaml. You can restart the connector, check the status, and enable to set it to automated at boot. Thank you. This concludes the video.